Hi guys, I'm here with Rory Feek and Joel Salatin on Rory's beautiful porch overlooking his farmstead. It's a beautiful day in May, and we're just here to have a little conversation about the state of health or lack thereof within the Christian community and what kinds of things we can do to change it and what needs to be addressed. So my first thing that I want to talk about is the concern about the loss of connection amongst the Christian community and everyone. I'm not isolating just any one faith or belief system, but between the loss of connection we have with our food, our health, our farming practices, and the fact that we often sit in a church pew and look around us and see just a slew of really sick people that maybe don't need to be. So I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Joe, because a lot of my thoughts are you gave them too.
Well, I think the Christian community has bought into the basic lifestyle and worldview of the Orthodox community, which is everything from farming is for adults, and blue collar, and there's a denigration of society with craft, with just trade, vocational craft, and farming is one of those.
Yes.
And so, even Christian colleges don't do ag majors or sustainable ag curriculum. It's all how to be a doctor, an attorney, or an accountant, or some sort of a more professional academic thing. And so we have I think in the Christian community we have definitely allowed ourselves to take on this kind of techno-sophisticated worldview, but the Bible is full of pastoral, highly connected. The parables are all, many of them are straight out of a pastoral mentality, and I mean even the Israelites, their neighbors, the Hittites and the Philistines, were all metal workers and iron and all that, and the Israelites weren't. They were more pastoral, and so I think that there's a lot of spiritual ramification as you leave this connection in the Christian community. You leave a lot of the meaning and the understanding. You can't read Psalm 23. What a difference it makes if you've ever had a sheep, right, and you read Psalm 23, for example. It adds every kind of depth to it, and or going to find the lost sheep that didn't come back to the fold. Planting wheat and knowing about weeds that come up and how do you treat that? Yeah, all of that has so much deeper meaning when you actually have tried to grow something or have an animal. It's big.
Yeah. Do you see either of you a displacement in faith from moving from God and His Word to doctors and scientists, instead of just trusting in what was created and given to us and the instructions that we have so clearly? We're suffering.
Well, sure. I mean, you go to prayer meeting and everybody's praying for the right medication and the right drug and the right procedure, and then you go to the house and the refrigerator's full of Coca-Cola and squeezable cheese and nachos. Yeah. And so is it any wonder that we in the Christian community are experiencing the same level of problems that are in the greater community, because we haven't embraced an alternative view, a narrow way, a serving without the camp. I mean, there's any number of ways to describe. The Israelite community was to be different. They had all sorts of dietary laws, relational laws, the Levitical code, and all of that was a part of not being subject to those diseases, not being subject to those economic problems that happen. I mean, it's economy, it's health, it's all this.
Yeah.
And so, God laid down some pretty easy cool rules to live by. And we have, in the Christian community, have largely spurned them as we have embraced the same idols, and objectives of the greater culture.
We're just Christian communities, like consumerism that's within that. It's with no conscience. That's not even part of it. You mentioned, I hadn't really thought about it before, that on the super liberal side of everything, they care way more about the earth and health and all those things, and yet for us it's not part of it. It's like, did we go to church? Are we reading our Bible? Did we tithe? Like, there's a few little checklist things that don't connect us to any of our moment by moment decision making.
Right.
And that's the disconnection to me, is like, it isn't really just those things. It should be a moment by moment connection to God. Like, is this really good for me? Is this what He wants my life to be filled with, my children to be filled with? Just because the television says it's what we should want and this is how to measure success, that feels most often not really where He would have us going.
Yeah, and in the Christian community, we often belittle the greenie environmental movement for physicalizing religion. Yeah, Gaia, creation worship, Romans chapter 1. We criticize them for physicalizing the spiritual, but we are guilty of refusing to physicalize the spiritual, and so both of those are improper. There needs to be a balance, and I think that the Bible is very clear that there is a physical object lesson of spiritual truth. I've given you a gift of good land, the land of Canaan, flowing with milk and honey. And all the promises. If you will live by my laws, you will have rains, you will have abundant crops, and that included a fallow. A lot of agricultural rules in there that worked, and so we Christians we want to move everything to some sort of a theological plane, where we sit around in our focus groups and academically discuss our theology.
Yes.
But as Francis Schaeffer said, we don't ask, how should we then live? What does this mean? What does loving your neighbor mean? Does it mean stinking up the neighborhood with a Tyson chicken house and pouring Roundup all over everything? Or does it mean actually stewarding the landscape so the neighbor's children don't get cancer and those kinds of things?
And you just mentioned a case of someone telling me.
Yeah, there's someone here at the conference just mentioned that in their church in Oregon, that in her church there are currently 50 people in her church with cancer. Can you imagine? Small church, and they're in a heavy herbicide, pesticide, chemical farm community region,
Right.
and and yet we Christians, we're supposed to dominate the earth. God gave us dominion. We've got this dominion mandate, as if everything is under our thumb, and we can walk around like a bunch of swashbuckling pirates exploiting because God gave it to us. Yeah. And actually, His dominion is more an idea of nurturing and caretaking, caressing, if you will, His template, as opposed to actually exploiting it for our gain.
Yeah. I love the spiritual physical connection too, because I know when I'm in my bare feet out in the grass and digging in the garden, or taking a walk through the woods or a hike along the ocean, as I have been lately, God's presence is there and I feel so connected. But then when you go into towns and cities, I can tell you one thing that happened on our farmstead. We love nature, We lived in nature. As soon as we had our first warm day, I'd throw the front door open and the kids would run out with their butterfly nets and their books, and we'd do school outside, and we'd have all this fun and just exploring and enjoying and nurturing and caressing nature. And then one day, the neighbors we had 200 acres beside us that was just beautiful, pristine meadows and forest, and the neighbor rented the land to someone who wanted to grow GMO corn. So a sprayer came in, sprayed everything. Within hours, it went from beautiful, colorful wildflowers and grasses and butterflies and birds to everything was dead. We lost our butterflies, our fireflies, our birds, and it remained just
Sterile.
for several years until I finally spoke to the owner, who was a conservative Mennonite woman, and I hadn't wanted to infringe, or this is my philosophy or my way of doing things, but I finally said something, and she felt horrible. She had no idea because they didn't see that part of their land very often, but I told her what had happened, and they immediately changed.
Wow.
They stopped that contract with that farmer. As far as I know, that land is fallow again. The land that we had purchased was completely desolate. I think I mentioned that a few minutes ago. We let it go fallow and then put animals on it and remineralized and all of that. It all came back to life. But it's all following nature, and we can say nature, which many people do, just attribute it all to nature, but nature came from the Creator. And we have to follow His principles. And then that translates into human health. And we cannot have vibrant health without being connected to nature and doing things God's ways. And I know that sometimes, as in your case with Joey, it didn't work out in the end. But I think that we're living in such a polluted world now, and I have no idea what Joey's background was up until the point that the two of you were together. I know that I grew up on extremely devitalized processed food, and I've had health issues because of it, and I try to work on my nutrition. We use herbal medicine. Food is medicine. Unfortunately, up until this point in time, I'm 57 years old, and I'm healthy. I've recovered health, but I may not, I may ultimately come down with something, but I put my trust in God, and no matter what happens in our family, we're going to put our faith in God's food. And I know that Joey had done some natural, non-toxic therapies.
She made all the right choices. From the time I met her, she was very conscious of all the things that she did. She wasn't like over the top, worried about, just every little thing, but she wanted to do the best right thing. So she was growing food. She was very healthy, took care of herself all the time. More than anyone that I know. And so that was a difficult one for me, is when you have someone like that who's worked so hard, and yet cancer comes and then they pass away. These are those kind of things where it's like it doesn't feel like there's a rhyme or reason, and as much prayer as went on, that can be confusing at times, because here we are saying you can live a healthier life and all these kinds of things, but it's taken a little while to realize that that's not a guarantee that you're going to live a longer life necessarily, but you're going to live a better life.
Thank you.
And it will do that. And at the end of the day, I think that if we could engineer, eat these things, grow these things, live this way, and you won't have any problems, we wouldn't need God anymore. That's
true.
Really why I think this stuff ends up being random quite often, is because He hasn't created it so that we can master it, even though we are trying very hard, just as corporations and everybody. It's like he has put some things in place to say, I think, here's the way I have it in mind. But even with that, it's not going to be without death or sorrow or pain or toil. But it could be without less.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't you think?
I do. Yeah, it's well said. People have had diseases long before chemicals ever came along.
Yeah.
Just like we've been abusing the land long before tractors came along.
Yeah.
The north of Africa used to be a forest.
You and I talked about that the average age, life expectancy in the revolutionary time frame. Almost everybody who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence were in their like late 30s and early 40s. And I was like, how and why can that be? And you were like, well, because that's the average life expectancy was like 43 years old.
Yeah.
Like death was, it isn't like before chemicals came, they just lived forever. It was always similar.
No, well, people still lived long.
Yeah. But they had more things.
But they had infectious things. They had sanitation, hygiene issues. As Sally Fallon says, the thing that changed disease the fastest was plumbers.
Yeah.
Indoor plumbing, water. You could bathe. You had hot water on demand. So that was a big change.
And they stopped throwing human waste out the window.
Started throwing human waste. Through which the chickens carried in. A lot of people don't realize. I listened to a wonderful lady who'd written a story on the times of Charles Dickens, and in the radio interview they asked her, what was the single biggest different. If I could transport myself in a time machine to Dickens' England, 1830, what would be the most shocking thing that I would see? She said, noise. Noise? We think cars and stuff. No, it was the horses and stagecoaches and the cobblestone streets and just noise. And the other thing was the manure. Mm-hmm. There was manure everywhere. And she said that actually she'd written a book about Dickens' England. And I love Charles Dickens is my favorite writer of all time. I just think that the guy was unbelievable. And she said, boys would have brooms stationed at like main London intersections, and for a shilling or whatever the thing was, businessmen would give these boys a little money, and they would sweep in ahead of him, so he didn't have to have all this manure on his feet when he went into the whatever where he was going, and so it was a very dirty kind of place, and so the automobile, of course, cleaned that up, and so there are other things, but sure, diseases have been around for a long time. The fact is, though, that the way to bet is with a template that agrees with the patterns we see in nature. For example, herbivores don't eat carrion in nature. So the whole let's cook cows and feed dead cows to cows that supposedly brought on bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow. If you had respect for patterns in nature, you would have never opted for that kind of a scientific breakthrough,
right?
Because your moral ethic, your respect of a creator's beautiful design template. Where do herbivores eat carrion in nature? Well, they don't.
They don't.
And so those are the kinds of things that we see, and the question I always have is what you believe in the pew showing up on the menu.
That's as usual, very well put. I like that. Yeah, and yet we go to church potlucks, and it's I don't eat it. I just don't. I bring my own food. I share it, and a few people might try it, but mostly they go, no, don't like that. Nothing.
Well, and if you go to the elders, say, I'll tell you what, at the next church potluck, how about we don't use styrofoam?
Yep.
And let's say we don't even use paper. Let's say we go to the Salvation Army and buy some of those mismatched plates, and we wash them. So there's nothing in the trash.
What an
idea. So there's nothing in the trash after the potluck. I mean, what are you, some sort of greeny, weeny, commie, pinko, tree-hugging, gay We can't even have that conversation
Right.
because it's considered it's a taboo. It's a taboo thing, and that's unfortunate. And look, I don't have all the answers, but I want to wrestle with it. I want to wrestle with the question. And if we're not willing to wrestle, then what are we here for?
That's good.
And so then we see these problems. What can we do to turn things around so that people can regain health and can overcome obstacles and can have healthy children? It's that's the puzzle in my mind. And of course, my work right now, what I really feel God has directed me to do is to help Christians find their way back. And I'm grappling with how do we do that? Of course we teach, but how do we really turn things around and help people to see? I know that there is a strong movement in some Christian communities of going back to the land, back to homesteading, back to food as medicine. And I'm so pleased to hear that. But by and large, people aren't doing that. They're sitting in the pews and they're checking their boxes, like you said, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. But yet they're totally missing this whole aspect of instruction that God gave us about how to be healthy. And to a very large degree, people don't want to hear it. I think oftentimes about how Jesus was the prophet who was rejected in his own town. And I can talk to other people. You've said the same thing in conversation privately with me with farming. People don't really want to hear us when they know us, but people need to hear what we have to say. It doesn't have to come from me.
Can you imagine like a big preacher or a preacher, whatever it happens to be, come up, because they worry about talking about money. It's like, oh gosh, everybody's dreading when he starts talking about money, whatever happens to be very divisive. Well, what's not divisive is, because they're never going to say it, is a preacher that will come up with, 70% of us are obese. Every one of us are unhealthy. And talk to you about the connection of our choices and with our children and our examples. Have you heard of such a thing? There aren't many people doing it, and it feels like that would be a pretty important place to start.
Yeah, well, and another place is just the amount of land that churches have.
Yeah.
The large, expansive yards.
Yeah.
How many churches, for example, if they offered community gardens in their expansive landscape plan to the community, wouldn't that be something? How about when you look? We're all getting together every week anyway. How about the church adopts half a dozen farmers to feed us and bring us food? We're all coming together anyway once a week. Let's adopt 6 farmers and keep them in business and vibrant and
that's a good idea.
and provide local food.
And instead of food banks and food pantries, have vegetables and eggs.
Right. Yeah. Real food.
Yeah.
But so many times the donated food drive, we can't take home canned stuff. That's not inspected. It's not, and they can't even take the kind of food that we eat all the time. And so, a lot of this, I think, does come from just the hubris of a techno-sophisticated culture as well, and just that we're not dependent anymore. We're so sophisticated. We're gonna be able to make food from microbes in a test tube,
and it's going to be cheap.
And we're not dependent anymore. And it'll be cheap, and ultimately there's a big spiritual ramification. The moment that you come out of dependency, you stimulate you stimulate hubris, and spiritually that's a bad gamble. That's going to lead you to a bad place. And so,
Sadly true.
Yeah.
Well, Rory, you're doing really beautiful things here in your homestead for your own family and for your community. The community is so important too. Family, God, family, community. And it's quite clear to me that you're doing beautiful things, and your sweet little girl is growing up in a beautiful environment, with or without all of us being here, you know. But you've got that beautiful garden and the farm animals, and you've been learning from Joel, and I learned from Joel. And I expect that you're going to hopefully, you know, have a long and happy, fruitful life. You're doing the right things, and you've made those changes. And that was not always the point where you were coming from years ago.
It was never the point that was coming from years ago. That's not, you know, if you're reaching for the brass ring, it doesn't look like this. The world doesn't give you the image of this kind of a brass ring, which is why most of the time, if you ever reach it, you're left empty. And that's why I think at the end of the day, a lot of like what Joel was being shared here is, it's amazing on the way there.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful, the process. If you get there and you have a sustaining life, or your farm, or whatever you happen to be doing, it's wonderful there. It's wonderful in all the places of it.
Yeah,
it's
it
great.
is.
Yeah, I love this. I love being here, being in a position of not only learning, but being someone who helps share a little bit at the same time.
Yeah, that's important, and that's
my neighbor Theron. This is really fun for us. He was speaking. He's a doctor speaking here, but you know, he's my neighbor. So I remember when he came to us and said, "I don't want to do." He's been part of this journey with us, turning into where he is and making the choices on the medical side that he's made. Just to see those things transform too in your speaking is really fun for me.
That's neat, and I want to talk to him.
You should talk to him for sure.
Yeah, it's so encouraging when I see medical professionals making those changes and realizing. There's another woman here who's a medical doctor. Now she's in naturopath, and she was kind of saying the same thing. She realized that the way of allopathic medicine is poisoning people, not curing people. It's dealing with symptoms, not with causes. We need to get back to causes, and part of that even is just enjoying the beauty of nature and digging your hands and your toes into the dirt and doing things with other people and building a community. And I thank you both for doing that. That's beautiful.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for launching.
It's
very cool.
Thank you. We're super excited about where we're going to go.
Good for you.
So,
Good.
Thanks a lot for listening, guys. See you next time.